Teachers are at the forefront of education and are best able to determine what they need in order to improve learning for students. When empowered through action research, they can inaugurate improvement plans that really work for the benefit of students.
So it helped me change a lot of things this year in the classroom to make it better for all of us.
In Program 1 of this issue of the Video Journal of Education, action research was presented as a process by which teachers develop questions regarding their practice, collect and analyze data, and through collaboration in action research groups, they refine their knowledge. The result is more powerful learning for students. In this videotape, Program 2, the 5 phases of action research will be explored, which as a dynamic model include developing the question, plan of action, data collection, data analysis, and a plan for future action, which can lead to developing new questions. As educators engage in reflection, self-inquiry, data collection, and analysis centered around their personal teaching interests, staff morale will improve, student achievement will increase, and educators will benefit by doing action research.
Action research really is a process. It's a process of inquiry. It's developing a habit of mind about who you want to be as a learner, in the classroom, as a teacher, how you want to interact with students.
Over the past several years, Kathy Caro Bruce has led dozens of teachers through the action research process in Madison, Wisconsin. Together with Mary Claire, an action research facilitator in Madison, they present the 5 phases of action research, beginning with developing the question. Action research as a process is the study of continuous research and learning.
Through the studies, you're able to see a variety of ways in which student learning has improved through the action research of teachers in Madison and elsewhere.
The 5 phases of action research is a continuous dynamic cycle. Developing the question is identifying a problem.
Many people start here, where you identify a problem, you think about why you want to study it, and you try to narrow it down and make it manageable. You come to a plan of action, you collect data, you analyze your data, you plan for future action, and you go in this kind of a cycle.
Developing the question begins with identifying a problem that forms the basis for research.
Sometimes you're looking just at yourself and how you can do a better job in your own environment. Sometimes people want to focus in on specific students, groups of students, their class. Sometimes it comes from just wanting to generate new knowledge to make sense of what you're learning by observing what's going on in your class, by putting a question out there and saying, I need to figure out what this means.
Typically, educators engage in action research to improve practice, to better understand a particular aspect of practice, to better understand one's practice in general, to promote greater equity, and to influence the social conditions of practice. As educators look for research questions, they can answer the question stems, I would like to improve, I am perplexed by, some people are unhappy about, I'm really curious about, I want to learn more about, an idea I would like to try out in my class is, something I think would really make a difference is, something I would like to do to change is, and right now, some areas I'm particularly interested in are. These sentence stems push an educator's thinking in different directions until a critical question surfaces. The educator must be committed to the question due to the time and energy that the research demands, as shown by Shawn Schradel as she considers her question with her action research group in Madison.
How does my peer tutoring program affect middle schoolers' mathematical self-esteem? I recruit middle schoolers who are struggling in math, below grade level, non-behavioral EEN. They travel to their feeder elementary schools and tutor a kindergarten first or second grader. The hope is that their self-esteem will increase because they're tutoring, they're peer tutoring. And all the talk is about how great they're doing and how they're making this other child feel so wonderful, when initially that's what we're trying to make them feel is so wonderful about it.
Questions must be doable, meaningful, close to practice, clearly stated, and self-reflective, such as Sean's question, how does my peer tutoring program affect middle schoolers' mathematical self-esteem?
The more focused you are, the narrower you are, the more easily you are able to see that what you're doing can make a difference. I mean, if you take it too broad or too complex, it's harder to do that.
Here's an example of something that probably isn't manageable. Why don't students do homework? It's way too broad. Are you talking about every student in the world? And how are you going to get that data? You'd probably have to leave the classroom and leave the school to get that.
Just as why don't students do homework is too broad, what can I do to get students to stop chewing gum in my class is too narrow.
The group just said to her, they had to counsel her, you can tell them that they can't chew gum. That's what you can do.
Writing my journal.
Dual language teacher Naotis Benija in New York City began with too broad a question which complicated her data collection. Her concern was how to address the needs of all of her students.
I wanted to do everything, but as I was looking at the data that I was collecting, I thought that it was going to be too much. It was going to be too much for me to analyze. It would be like always trying to do a lot of things but not concentrating something specific.
With help from her action research team, she narrowed the question down, which simplified her data collection.
I kind of changed the whole way that I was doing it. I did it more. I started, and now I'm starting doing it like more in different groups rather than presenting a whole lesson to the whole class. Part of the things that I'm collecting is I'm writing and concentrating only in 5 students. And in those 5 students, I have kids who represent the high achieving, the one that are doing average work, and the one that are having a difficult time.
Did we answer your questions about the student unit? Good grip, Allie. I think so. Okay.
Alan Cross in Madison found the inspiration for his action research question in student evaluations concerning a student-led exploratory unit.
And one student stated that she learned the most from the student unit during the course of the year.
What I recall is a statement that you made at some point that the student designed and run unit was the event that you learned the most from last year. I want to ask you more about that statement. What in particular did you learn, if you can try to articulate it?
I don't know, it just stuck in my head more because it was more of an experience. And it just, since everybody was since everybody made it, they kind of understood where, how this would be kind of fun for everybody.
So the fun factor, that's something I question quite a bit.
At this point, Alan has 2 versions of his question and seeks help from his Culture and Climate Action Research Group.
One version is, what can I learn from theorizing about a 3-week student-planned and conducted unit of study? The other version is, what can I learn about students' attitudes about teaching, school, and learning from a 3-week student-planned and conducted unit of study? So, I think they're the same thing, essentially, but...
They were different to me.
One is student planned.
One included students, the other one was theorizing.
About,
Unless there's a more in-depth definition of what you're theorizing next, but the second one, to me, was student.
It's more descriptive, more...
Yeah.
For a lot of people, coming up with a question is really, really hard. And they want to do action research, but developing the question is a challenge. Some people come and they have a question. They say, here's my question, I'm ready to go. Now sometimes I worry about those people because as they start to engage in the group dialogue, they're not as open to wanting to be influenced. So when we start our groups, we say, come with a topic, or if you have a question you're interested in thinking about, that's fine. But you don't have to have your question.
As there is no recipe for developing an action research question, the group dialogue provides both feedback and data that allows the question to go deeper and become more profound for the teacher over time.
For some people, it takes weeks. Some people, it takes months. I had one teacher say to me, you know what, I didn't actually figure out my action research question until I wrote about it at the end of the year, and then it sort of was synthesized. It came to me what my question really was. This is a real example from one teacher. She started with the question of, why aren't my students motivated in math? As she went deeper, she realized she wanted to refine her question, and her question became, how can I motivate students to do their work? And as she went even deeper to try to think about what her role is, her action research question became, in what ways can I make math learning meaningful for my students?
The next phases of action research are to develop a plan of action and data collection, which can occur simultaneously and mutually alter one another. Since the action research takes place over the course of a school year, developing the question and plan of action often begins in September.
One thing we help teachers do is figure out how to put together a data collection plan. So they've made some choices about what kind of data they think will help them answer their questions. We have them really encourage them to look at multiple sources at multiple points in time to try to increase the validity of what they're learning. And then they map out a plan, what they're going to do over the year, when they're going to do it, who's going to help them do it.
They can begin by asking, what data do I currently have about my students? What feedback do I have from parents and others that will influence my thinking? Where are the gaps with my students? And what do I want to record now to be sure that I don't forget later?
Once they've collected some data, they'll come back to their group meeting and they'll say, here's what I collected and here's what I learned. And the group will say, so what are you going to do next? And they'll say, well, you know, there's some other data I want to get. And so the data and what they collect over the year becomes the focus of their work.
We decided to do it together.
Susie Verhelst and Monica Severa in Madison have created a plan of action to guide them in answering their shared action research question.
Our project deals with language and culture, and what we would like is to find ways to help students understand the role that language and culture play together, the role of culture on language and the role of language on culture.
And the official question is, how can we raise our students' consciousness of their own cultural assumptions inherent in language and help them to examine the role that it plays in their lives?
What we're hoping to do is to have our students have some activities which we've planned for them, and to have them get from those activities, what assumptions are they making? What things are they thinking about when they hear people speak a certain language, when they do certain things in their lives?
Who prepares your meal in your house?
Susie has her students discuss how their individual families eat meals together.
On Jewish holidays, we don't eat kosher strictly, but sometimes we have traditional Jewish meals or something, and so my mom will make it because nobody else knows how.
What would you have to eat?
Well, on Passover, there's always this thing where you hide a matzah and then the youngest kid has to go look for it. And on Rosh Hashanah, you have apples and honey. And on Hanukkah, you have potato pancakes or latkes.
Do you have any special foods you eat on different times?
Yeah.
What do you have?
I have turkey for Thanksgiving.
Turkey for Thanksgiving. Does everyone eat turkey on Thanksgiving?
No.
No, you don't.
We have ham.
You have ham on Thanksgiving.
In order for students to see how language shifts and changes, Monica has them brainstorm both new and obsolete words in the English language.
Amy, from your group, would you share your best example of something new and what the words are that go with it?
We just said internet, and we said search the net and log on and email me and stuff.
Does somebody want to volunteer their old information? Something that's going away.
Phones, the crank phones, clocks with hands instead of digital, lard soap, non-electric sewing machines, carriages with horses.
I
Throughout the year, Monica and Susie will collect similar anecdotal data about how their students perceive culture and language.
This is my third time doing classroom research, and I love to do it because it jumpstarts me.
It's really nice to look at the bigger picture and see some things that are really exciting and energizing.
I put together an action plan that I would maybe use, you know.
Librarian Elaine Harger facilitates this action research team in New York City, which is very focused on the action plans they develop. Considerable time is spent in training how to write and use an action plan.
These steps are things that I need to do. And so I asked myself, when do I need to do them? And for this one, make sure that library shelves are neat. I have written down that I need to do it the evening before this particular activity I'm going to engage in, and right before that class comes into the library.
I couldn't complete last time because I didn't know if I had to set a timeline for myself in order to, you know, like from what time to what time I'm going to be doing this, so that I had to analyze the data.
Probably what you want to do is divide that activity into 2 or 3 components. The first component would be, what are your interview questions going to be? So coming up with a list of the interview questions. And then you would want to schedule the interview. A third component could be, you know, reviewing or transcribing or doing something to that interview. Doing something after the interview, that could be on your next month's action plan. I mean, it could be something that you haven't really anticipated.
This was just a little taste of what action research is, and it's just beginning. It's just taking off now. At least for me.
In their plan of action, researchers need to consider all potential data sources. Emily Calhoun organizes data into 3 categories: existing or archival data, what data is already out there and simply needs to be found; conventional data, what standard data tools are easy to use and analyze; and inventive data, what are more creative ways of collecting data that can be achieved.
Mrs. Beck is also going to work.
Librarian Sherry Grant is co-teaching with Pert Beck to help her 3rd graders broaden their understanding of poetry. Sherry has created a plan of action that uses both conventional and inventive data sources that she reviews with her action research group.
The question I started the year with was, does my implementation of a unit of study on poetry affect the students' attitudes toward poetry and the writing of poetry, reading, and circulation of poetry books? And does that carry on in the classroom and at home?
I surveyed all of the students in this particular 3rd grade classroom before we started any poetry and found out about their attitudes. Do they like poetry? Do they like to read it? Do they like to write it? How would they feel if they wrote a poem and someone criticized it? So that's the premise that I started with, and then we started a total immersion into poetry. Quiet moon, how many syllables do we have? Quiet moon. 2. How many are we supposed to have for a true haiku? 5. So this just gets you into the habit of the form that you use.
But I wanted to share some of the data that came back. I did survey the students, and I still have not charted their post-attitudinal surveys about poetry. But today, if today's any indication, they're very receptive to poetry now, and they were not necessarily when we started this year.
The 3rd graders love to share their creative work in poetry.
Flowers grow in spring. Pictures painted on the ground. Very beautiful.
That's great. Lovely. I did go through some of the circulation records to see if the students had checked out more poetry books after we initiated the poetry unit of study than they had prior to the initiation of the unit. And so far I haven't had a chance to go through all that data. But I'm hoping it will show that they did check out more poetry books.
Through triangulation, action researchers must find data from different sources.
As people are thinking about what kinds of data sources they might use, they might say, you know, I think what I want to do is interview staff. I might want to interview students, and I might want to send a survey home to parents. I might want to do that more than once. One of the things that this suggests to you is
that your data sources, when you think of triangulation, should also provide you with breadth, depth, and corroboration. So if I want to get a lot of feedback from my staff around a certain topic, that might be where I get my breadth. I send out a survey to staff, let's say, and I'm getting breadth. What I might want to do, though, is learn more specifically what people are really feeling and some of the issues, so I might interview students, I might interview parents. Corroboration, I might say, let me look at some of the student work to be able to see if what I'm thinking is really corroborating through the evidence I can get from student work.
As educators think about collecting data, they need to develop a plan.
We call it a data action plan, where people start mapping out what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, who's going to help them do it, what resources they have. And they work in partners or in small groups or even the whole group, and people can give them suggestions and ideas.
All right, here's the problem. Each helicopter has 4 blades. We see 36 blades. How many helicopters are there? Okay, so you can go ahead and start and use your manipulatives or your pencil.
Inspired by research showing that no 2 students think in the same way, Marilyn Miracle Williams in Scottsdale collects data to support her question. How does cognitively guided instruction affect the ability of lower students in mathematics?
For years, I've wondered about the low students that I have and ways to enable them to do better in mathematics. So I decided this year I would just track that small group of children that I have that were having difficulty.
Alec determines the number of helicopters by working with numbers, and Shauna draws out the number of blades, knowing that there are 4 blades for each helicopter.
So this is like the 4 blades on the helicopter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then I counted the blades and it had 36. And then I counted the helicopters and it got to 9 helicopters.
You got that there's 9 helicopters if there's 36 blades. Okay. How about you, Alec? Do you agree with that number, first of all? Did you get the same answer?
Yep.
Hey, that's always a good thing. So tell us how you got yours. I'm seeing that you worked yours differently. You wrote down some numbers rather than drawing a picture. So tell us how you did yours.
I did all the 4s that equaled up to 36.
Okay.
And after that, I checked myself. I knew what 4 plus 4 was 8, and 8 plus 8 is 16.
Sometimes those are the very kids that really are much more successful when you give them an alternative way. And like today, for instance, Alec just added, his was not real conventional, but more conventional. He did just 4 plus 4, and he just kept adding till he got 36. Shauna drew helicopter blades and drew those out and then counted them.
Actually, I'm hoping to do, between now and the end of the year, to do some videotaping and putting it either on videotape or CD-ROM to send home to parents to let parents see how their children solve problems.
So data can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. Teachers often rely heavily on qualitative data in action research because they feel as though what they're learning is rich and can be contextualized to their particular classroom.
We're not about one-shot deals with data. We're about data over time.
Educators use numerous techniques for gathering action research data, including interviews, checklists, portfolios, individual files, diaries or journals of both teachers and students, field notes and observation records, logs of educational events, student-teacher discussion and interaction, questionnaires, documentary or archival evidence, audio tapes, videotapes and still photography, time on task analysis, and case studies. Bilingual teacher Lourdes Almanzar in New York City discusses her data collection with the group.
My action research question is, how can peer conferencing help my 4 native Spanish-speaking third grade writers improve in content and mechanics in Spanish? So in terms of data, what I did was I first looked into their their written work, what they have done so far, and just see their strengths and weaknesses. I also I did a pre-interview with them. I interviewed them. These 4 particular students, I developed an interview sheet where I asked them questions about writing and how they felt about writing. I had them work on a letter, write a letter to a character in one of the stories we were doing in Spanish. So,
as a follow-up to their writing, Lourdes observes her students peer conferencing. Afterwards, she interviews the students and records their feedback concerning the project. Lisa Hatchar videotapes the 2 students Lourdes is not currently observing. Later on, she watches the tapes and records her observations.
During the peer conferencing, another goal or objective of mine was to see how really they communicate with each other. How do they critique each other's work?
You can start off collecting your data on various topics, and then all of a sudden you think, wow, I should collect on this topic too, another topic. You can't do that in a formal research project. You can't tinker with those variables. In action research, you can say, I think some topic aside, this will make a difference, and you can go right ahead and do it just as you would as a teacher.
As action researchers proceed with collecting data, they should not narrow their focus too early. By continuing to explore, ask questions, and consider new research, their inquiry will deepen significantly.
There are no clear-cut ways of collecting data. There are no clear-cut ways of analyzing data. People are exploring and experimenting all the time, which I really am heartened by, because it means that people are open to what's important about data, and that is, what kinds of things can we collect that will actually help us learn something?
With data analysis, teachers reflect on their action research and begin to make plans for future actions.
And I didn't realize how important reflection is in the whole process of action research. You have to be able to reflect on your practice.
Reflection challenges an educator's assumptions about what is happening in school.
What about trucks? What about buses? What about the subway?
Kindergarten teacher Annette Saxton in New York City gathers evidence of her students' understanding of sentences and stories before analyzing the data with her action research group. They will help her reflect. After sharing her analysis of the data, members of the action research group pose questions for her to ponder and answer later.
Have you considered how conversations between children help them to determine what forms of writing become acceptable?
What types of modeling are you providing for the children? How much modeling in terms of writing do you do for the kids?
How often do they see someone writing at home?
These are really good. I didn't think of half of these. This is good.
What'd you just say?
I says I haven't thought of half of these. I mean, the things sometimes that you do every day, you don't realize how important it is until someone says, do you do it? And then you say, yeah, but you know, I didn't even think of it as a...
That's what this is good for.
Yeah.
The process of analyzing data begins with going through everything, making notes as they go, looking for themes and patterns.
So as they look for these themes, they might pick out 3 to 5 themes that they say, boy, these are the most important ideas that I want to take away with my action research from my work. And then this is where the creative part comes in. People start coding and labeling and those things that they think are the big ideas, then the little ideas under the big ideas. We also encourage them to say, there may be just one idea there that is so powerful or such a surprise or so interesting that you want to make sure you hold on to that idea.
Teachers are encouraged to write continuously as they study their data.
We also tell them, leave it, step back from it, come back to it later and review what you've done.
As they conclude the process of data analysis, the researchers should write up and support the major points and draw conclusions based on the evidence presented.
See the oil coming up in the bottom of the tube there? Okay, well you want to measure from the top of that bubble to the end of the tube.
The top of the bubble?
Because you want to know the height of the air column in there.
Susan Such in Scottsdale did her action research on the effectiveness of rubrics. She began by having one class do an experiment without the use of a rubric, and another class use a rubric in the same experiment. Both classes were to take the results of the lab and make a graph representing the declining temperature of hot oil to the point of absolute zero. Without the rubric in the first class, the students had difficulty properly graphing the numbers.
Okay, so now that I actually have the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do I, so at 75 degrees it was what, 1 centimeters or something?
No, you go to the end of the tube.
That's 10.
So that, no, it's 10.10.
Okay, 11.
This is the second class.
On your desks today, you have a rubric that you can use when you come back into the lab to start doing the lab write-up.
Much to her surprise, the students with the rubric experienced less success than she expected. They didn't know how to use the rubric.
My absolute zero was at 1.9 centimeters.
No. What you have to do is use your data,
Right.
draw the best fit line.
I did that. You want to do it from there?
And then see where it crosses the zero.
And that's it?
And that's it.
We misunderstood the rubric on what to determine. We thought we knew what absolute zero was and when it happened, rather than determining what absolute zero is. So the rubric was right, but we read it wrong. So.
Later on, while analyzing her data with the Action Research Group, Susan refines her strategy.
What kind of comments are you getting from kids about their feelings about using the rubrics? And are they saying, I hate them, I love them,
I haven't really asked them to write down or respond to that. I should. I'll do that. To see how they feel about that. Yeah.
As a result of her action research and with the help from her group, Susan made the rubrics effective.
The second rubric that we had, I wrote directions on the front of the rubric, on the very top of it, how do you use a rubric? And then in class, I talked about it. And then I saw, again, almost no difference. The scores were essentially the same. Well, so I went back and again talked to the students for the third lab, and we really went over it in pretty great detail, and I found that there was a 5% difference in scores of students who used the rubric. So what I learned was that you really need to go through the use of these tools with students so that they can use them effectively. They aren't born with that knowledge.
Planning for future action includes writing a report as well as beginning the cyclical process once again by developing new questions.
We have got very, very strong, clear messages from teachers that it is another layer of learning when they do that final write-up. When they lay their data out on their floor and put their journal entries and their surveys and their quantitative data, whatever they have collected, and they have to start synthesizing it and give a language to what they're learning.
Many teacher research reports have that personal story in there because that's often what provided the impetus to pursue a certain question, because they had experienced it in their own professional lives.
And often we say to people, you know what, just tell your story. And actually we've had some wonderful examples. One woman used Alice in Wonderland as a metaphor to describe her whole action research. And she had art that she put in with it, and she used that as her description, her journey through her action research.
The suggested components of the Action Research Report include an abstract of the study, statement of the question and rationale for addressing it, summary of actions that the researcher took to address the question, description of the context, setting, or background of the study, explanation of the research methods and types of data collected, descriptive account or narrative of what happened during the study, analysis or interpretation of the data collected, the conclusions and recommendations for future actions, and connections to the educational research literature.
We're going to look at our language now.
Teachers complete their action research with a great sense of pride.
When they step back, they can say, you know what, here's what I did, here's how I did it, and you know what, here's what I learned from that. They're able to articulate what they've learned and what they're going to do next.
Ultimately, the analysis of action research should lead to action. After teacher librarian Sherry Grant completed her first year of action research studying students' attitudes toward the library, she was surprised at the data she received and the resultant changes she made.
When I surveyed the kids, they felt empowered because no one had really asked them how they felt before, and they loved that. They said they wanted chairs to be more comfortable in the easy read area when we share stories and have lessons. So as a result, I went to the PTO and asked for funding, and the chairs, when we started our instructional lesson today, were a result of some of that survey data that I pulled back from the kids.
The second grade students of Rosa Garcia in New York have benefited from her action research.
I spent all last year studying how writing took place in my classroom, and it helped me see, where children needed to go.
This is my subway report. I did a lot of it, and now I want to read it to you. People need train stations to get on the trains. Subways are like underground streets. Subways are only found in cities, not under farms.
They look at other people's writing with a lot of respect, where we share ideas, and the children discuss their ideas and analyze their own writing.
Action research is an ongoing cyclical process wherein analysis of data continually leads to new questions, actions, and data. Through continuing research, math teacher Beatrice Cohen discovered that her honor students needed training in note-taking.
I thought kids, of course the honors kids use their notes to study. Of course an honors student opens their textbook and looks at it. No, the pre-survey said no, they didn't, just like the Algebra 2. And so this did have the effect on them that it had on the algebra class.
Somebody said to me once, isn't this just good teaching? And really it is. It is just good teaching. That's what we're doing. We're looking at our practice, asking questions, trying to collect some data about what we're learning, reflecting on it, maybe revising what we're going to do the next time. That's good teaching. The difference, I think, for some people is the idea that it's systematic.
With the systematic process of action research, teachers feel professional, exhilarated, and in control of their own destiny.
We never really get to talk about what we do in our classrooms. And to have somebody, just for people to have that audience and a focus and a reason for that audience, because they have something they want to work on, they want to change. There are people there supporting them who are really interested in what they're saying.